Welcome back to the cave. Doing some more fishing in the basement with the river rats. Today I'd like to talk about rod repair. Rod building. It's a mystery to a lot of people. A lot of people break a guide. They scrap the rod. Now, sometimes we don't always need an excuse to buy a new rod, but if it's only a tip top or one guide, it's no big deal to fix it. Ordering stuff from a Spanish kind of Amazon company called Waven. And they have everything rod building as far as components. They have guides, they have thread. So let me show you a couple rods here that I made up. Easy enough. These are ice fishing rods. I was buying the blanks from Netcraft in the States. They were only like less than $10 each. Put a little piece of cork on them. Put my own guides on them. And then these little spring bobbers for ice fishing. There's nothing more accurate. There's nothing more sensitive. A fish just has to breathe on your little 1/100th of an ounce jig with 1 pound test, and you'll see the bite. These little rods bend forever, make any fish feel big. So that's ice fishing. Here's another ice fishing rod that I use for bigger prey. Let's say I'm fishing for walleye, or I know some spots where I can catch some bass through the ice. Don't keep them, but they're a lot of fun. Now, you'll notice I've got what we used to call the Fenwick twist, which is a spiral of the blank, the guides on the blank. So now, no matter how much the rod bends, that line doesn't touch the blank. And that way you'll never have to worry about wrecking your line, wrecking the blank. So, that's ice fishing. We're not talking ice fishing today, we're talking carping. So let's take these out of the way. You'll recognize the make, Monster Carp Rods. Broke my heart last spring when I leaned it against my back doors and the wind shut the door and broke my blank. Now that was a catastrophic break. You can't fix a snap like that. Okay, now I got some spare guides. Now, carp guides are a lot different than your regular North American bass walleye rod. Here's a carp rod guide. Really big guide and a bigger barrel. These are normal tip tops for North American rods. Really hard to find a bigger ring on a North American rod unless it's deep sea fishing, and even then it's hard to get a really big ring. But lucky for me, Waven had some. Now I found for carp rods, the blank is a little thicker than your regular North American rod too. So I find that your barrel sizes between 3 mil, 3.5, and 4 mil will fit most of our carp rods. Now, as far as the rod guides, well, I've got years and years of collecting old broken rods that I find on the bank broken. I bring them home, I strip the guides, and I keep putting them in this box. And eventually, someday, when I break a rod or I want to make another rod, I got a pretty good selection of guides that I can save the rods. Now, years ago, Cabela's, I could buy guide sets. And then I could pick whatever guides I needed to fix my rods. But that was then, this is now. Here we go. We'll take the tip top off. This is from my Monster broken rod. So here's another set of guides that I can save up. So it's a little hard to tell sometimes, but you've got your barrel, and then you've got some black thread below the barrel that is basically, it's not only cosmetic, it'll strengthen the tip and it gives it a nice finish. Now what I usually do is I try to take a little bit of that epoxy off right where the guide hits the thread. Now try to stay on the metal of the tip top, because you don't want to nick that blank, because then that'll make a weak spot. So by sliding down the blank, I can tell when I hit the thread because it don't go any further. So there you go. Now all you need is a lighter, a little bit of heat. I'll use a glove. You can use pliers. Heat up the barrel. Heat it up pretty good. It doesn't have to turn right red, but get some good heat on it. Okay, now I should be able to just twist and pull that off. There you go. So now your guide is off. All that's holding that in there is like a heat glue. Same thing as you get from your heat gun, your glue gun. I had some specific glue that I originally bought 30 years ago. I can't find it anymore, but that's okay because any kind of that heat gun glue will work. So now this is the other guide I was showing you. Barrel size is a little big, but it'll work. If you're worried about too much play in there, you can wrap a layer of thread on there, put some nail polish on it, and that'll make it a tighter fit. But I wouldn't worry too much about that. So I think this one here is a 3.5 mil barrel. That's why I'm saying between 3.5 and 3 mil will fit most of our carp rods. So now I'm going to take a little bit of this glue gun glue, pinch a little piece off, roll it in my fingers, shove it in there. Okay, now it's in there. So now I've got my glue. There's my tip top. Here's my new one with the ceramic insert on it. Again, gonna put some heat on there, and that's gonna melt that glue inside there. So now the glue is liquid. Shove it back on. Try to keep it straight with the rest of your guides. Let that harden. There you go. Just replace the tip top. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a guide off. So now let's say one of your other guides is damaged. So again, when you're taking off a guide, stay on the foot of the guide. But this is what I mean about staying on the foot of the guide. Stay on the steel. So if you see how it's bulbous and then it comes down, well, the foot of my guide, I presume, goes up to here. So now I'm going to cut that finish off the top of it so you can see the guide underneath. Again, I'm putting pressure and I'm on the foot of the guide. So no matter how much pressure I put on there, I'm not going to nick my blank. So now you can see the foot of the guide, the foot of the guide. I cut through the epoxy and I cut through the thread that's holding that guide. So now I'm going to bend it a little bit to the side. Nope, not coming off. Gotta take some more off. Little bit at a time. Try it again. There you go. So now all that's left is the clear epoxy that went underneath the guide. So now if you notice, I peel this, and this is the thread that it was wrapped with. Now if you're very meticulous and you can find that one row of thread that wraps that, you can unwrap the whole thing. But if you don't have to, don't bother. You know, okay, here we go. I found the end of the thread. Now you can just unravel that whole thing. So there you go. That's what holds your guide, is that thread. And then it's coated with epoxy. Now again, you notice the leftover epoxy on there. You can take it off at the risk of nicking the blank. So be very careful with that. So now I'm going to see if I got a guide that size that I can replace. Here's a 1 foot. It's close. It's close. Now if you wanted to, you can put this to replace the 2 footer, the 2 foot guide. I'm going to strip some of this. Yeah, I got to go that way. I'm going to strip some of that off, and I'll tie this guide in its place. So what I'm going to do is, since that guide's not the same as the 2 foot guide, I am going to get rid of a little bit of that epoxy. Okay, again, I found the end of the thread. Unravel it. There you go. Now you're just left with a little bit of epoxy. You keep your blade really low and flat. You don't have to worry about nicking the blank. And sometimes you can take a lot of that stuff off with just your fingernail. So there you go. There's the one side that's pretty well cleaned up. Now since I'm going to replace this with a one-legged guide, I'm trying to find the spacing where this guide used to be, which is right in the middle here. So I'm going to compromise. So now I've got to clean this epoxy lump off. There you go. So now I'm going to wrap that on there. Okay, my center was here, so now I'm going to take this. I'm going to bring it down to there. So now you notice my spacing is pretty close to there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap that up with a little bit of masking tape. So now I'm going to try to keep it straight with the rest of the guides. So usually I stand the guides facing up, and then I center this one up. It looks to me like I'm pretty close to centered where the old one was. Wrap that on there. Good to go. Now I can start wrapping. There you go. Blank holder. An old box. Got a couple slots in it. Now I can take my blank, put it in there. It's tight enough that it holds its position. I can start wrapping. I just replaced on one of my 10-foot Daiwa Black Widows. Now these are the factory guides. This is the guide I replaced. The only difference I can tell is that it hasn't got as much epoxy as the factory guides. So let's get back to wrapping up this one. Now let's talk about rod wrapping thread. You can buy all kinds, again, from a specific rod building supplier. Now, there's different thicknesses of thread. There's A size, which is a very small diameter thread. Now, it works, but it takes a lot longer to wrap a guide. If you wrap the guide too tight, well then once you put your epoxy on it, it comes transparent. Now, it still serves a purpose and that guide will never move, but it takes a little bit longer, and I find that if I go with a D thread, it's a thicker diameter, wraps the rod a lot quicker, and once you put your 2-part clear epoxy on it, it'll look great. Now there's all kinds of colors, but most of the time when you put your epoxy on it, everything turns black. If you want it to stay that proper color, well, you can buy specific color preserved threads, or you can buy a color preservator that you put on there before you put your clear epoxy on. Does it make a difference? I don't think so. So this one's brown. Oh, I still got some D thread. See, there you go. Here's A thread, here's D thread. Now, okay, this is green. Now, I don't know if you can see that. You can almost tell how the D thread is much thicker than the A thread. Now, the A thread, you would use that, let's say, on little tiny ice fishing blanks or little ultralight rods with tiny little guides. When you're talking bigger guides, the D thread is a lot easier to go with. Now, if you haven't got rod specific thread, you can use 30-pound Power Pro. You can use Dacron. Okay, if I had a double foot guide, I can replace exactly what was on there. Well, right now all I got is a single foot. But the process of wrapping it on is the same whether you got a double foot or a single foot. Double foot, you tape up both sides, try to put it in the same place where the old one was. Single foot, it'll work. It'll work. So, let's wrap it. So, again, masking tape. So now you notice I taped up my thread going that way. So now I'm just going to put a couple loose wraps going down, go over your guide. Okay, now you notice my thread is past the guide. So now, without trying to pull too hard on your guide, straighten her out. Now you're crossing your thread, and now you're going to start wrapping this way. So now I'm going to try to jump onto the foot of the guide. There we go. I'm on, and now I can start wrapping up. You'll notice I got a couple spaces in there. Don't worry about that, because once I'm wrapped, I can push that in with my fingernail. So now that that's wrapped, now I can get rid of this thread. Because now it's locked in underneath all them other wraps. Now that thread, save it, because you're going to need it later for locking in the thread once you're done wrapping. So again, keep going up. Now they do make nice little machines and stands for rod building, and you can have like a beautiful foot pedal and the whole works, but don't need it. So now I don't really need this masking tape anymore neither, because now the guide is going to hold properly. Okay, again, try not to pull too hard on your thread, because the harder you pull on your thread, the thinner it gets, and then the more transparent the guide is going to be underneath. Okay, now that you're up to this point, you can see you've only got maybe another 1/8 of an inch, 3/16 of an inch to wrap. At this point, you got to put your little loop in there. That's going to help finish off and lock in your thread that you're wrapping with. So here's that piece of thread that I cut off originally. This is where you could use a third hand, but I'm going to put that underneath there. Okay, loop is on. Now I'm wrapping right over top of it. You can take, I don't know, another half a dozen wraps over top of it. Hold on to your wrap that you already done. Put your loose end through that little loop. Here's the other end of my loop. Now I slowly pull that in, and it'll pull that piece of thread right underneath. So now that's pretty well locked in. Now what I like to do with that little end is I put it on the guide foot, which gives me a lot more tension, and it'll hold everything in. Now you notice it's a little unruly, a little bit of a gap, but no, you just tuck it in with your fingernail, little popsicle stick, whatever you want. There you go, there's your guide. It's wrapped. It's not very solid right now. So now at this point you can adjust it if you had to make it in line with the rest of your guides. Now that one don't look too bad. Okay, now from this point, you would put your finish on it. Now like I said, if you haven't got two-part epoxy, you could use clear nail polish. They do make specific two-part epoxy for rod building. It's a very thick epoxy. Works very well, but it's hard to get across the border because it's a toxic liquid. So my compromise is I bought some two-part epoxy for lure making from a Canadian company called RealProLureMaking.com. They make different kinds of head cement. Now that's a one part, that'll work, but it's a very thin coat. Now this is a two-part epoxy that I got from them. Part A, part B. Still not as thick as your regular rod building epoxy, but your first coat will soak right in, right nice. It'll go underneath your guide. It'll seize everything. From there on in, put as many coats as you want. Now, you got to remember, this takes 12 to 24 hours to dry. Now, if you put it on thick, of course it's going to drip. So either you keep turning your blank until it starts solidifying, or you don't worry about putting on a thick coat. But I'll show you what I've done. That's my rod holder. That's the little motor that I got from Netcraft. And what I'll do with this blank is I'll shove it on there, plug that in, give it a little push, there you go. So now that little motor, which I just zip tied onto a cardboard box, that little motor was like, it was under 20 bucks. Again, from Netcraft in the States. All things rod building. Now you notice how it turns the guide at a very slow pace. That way your clear coat doesn't have a chance to drip or build up onto one side. So I keep this turning until the clear finish solidifies. After that, that's where you got to decide how much you want to put on there, or if you just want it to serve the purpose, that's good enough. So you'll notice this little end here. Some people cut it off right away. I don't. I leave it there, put my clear coat on it. Once everything solidifies, then I get a little nail clipper and I just clip the little end of that protruding thread. I put another coat of clear finish on there, and there you go. I replaced the guide, I saved the rod. No big deal. So, hopefully I've taken some of the mystery out of rod repair. I can always mix some epoxy, put some on there and show you, but it's a no-brainer. I don't have to do that. Who knows, you might come up with another kind of finish that you like. I really like that UV stuff, which is a liquid. Let it embed. I haven't tried it yet myself, but that would work. That UV liquid where you put it on, that UV glue, and then put your UV light on it, everything solidifies. You know, that would be a great idea, because then you wouldn't even have to put it on a rotator like this. Now, if you use clear nail polish, you can do that too. So again, hopefully I've taken some of the mystery out of rod repair, and hopefully everybody's got some rods that could use a new guide or could use a new insert. It's not that hard. Hopefully this helped. I'm glad I was able to share this with you. Tight line, everybody. Do that little loop. I just pulled my loop out. Cut.